Hi guys, back again. Did a story a while back. It was about Joseph, and it was the first part of his story. Try to break his story up into a number of sort of smaller parts because there's an awful lot happens in Joseph's life. Now, we're going to move on to part 2. Now again, this story is based on what you'll find in the book of Genesis. I'm going to try and become Joseph. I want to remind you first of all though where we've been. Part 1 of the story, Joseph's brought up in a large family. He has a number of older brothers. Now these brothers don't seem to be very obedient to their father. They're always going away and doing their own thing, hiding from their father. Joseph seems to be a completely different boy. He's obviously listened to his father's teaching about God. Joseph is very faithful to God, and he's very obedient to God, and he's very obedient to his father, because that's what God expects of children, that they should be obedient to their father. Jacob was a good father to Joseph. You may have heard, if you've watched the story before, you'll know that Jacob had given Joseph a multicoloured coat, and that the other brothers, they were just jealous of this. God also had great plans for Joseph, and he gave Joseph abilities. He gave him the ability to interpret dreams, but he also gave Joseph himself some really interesting dreams, which were, if you like, pointing to the future and things that God was going to do with Joseph later in his life. When he shared these dreams with his brothers and his family, they just thought he was showing off, but he was actually just telling them these were the dreams that God had given me, and that one day these would actually come true. So that's a bit of a background to where we've been. So let's get into the character of Joseph. I'm going to try and tell this story from Joseph's perspective again. So let's go. Now, you'll remember what had happened. I had been sent by my dad to go and find my brothers and find out what they were doing. And it turned out, again, that they weren't in the place that my dad had sent them to. So I eventually tracked them down, but when I caught up with my brothers, they actually attacked me. And they threw me down this dry well. And I could hear that they were actually talking about killing me. But fortunately, some of my oldest brothers didn't think that was a good idea. And so they didn't kill me. But what they did do, they decided it was a good idea to sell me. So they sold me to some passing traders, and these traders were heading for Egypt. Well, so I found myself in Egypt, and I was put up for sale in the slave market. And I was bought by a man called Potiphar. Now it turns out Potiphar was a very important man. He was a soldier. He was the captain of the king's guard. Pharaoh himself, this was the captain of Pharaoh's personal guard. So he was an important man. And I was bought by Potiphar and went to work in his household. Now, I never lost any faith in God. I know that the things that were happening didn't seem to make much sense to me. But I just trusted God, and I just knew that he was with me. And indeed the Lord was with me. And, I just worked for Potiphar just as hard as I had worked for my father. Any job that I was given, I did it to the best of my ability. And I could tell that the Lord was with me, because everything I did was just blessed by God. I was successful. No matter what job Potiphar gave me, whether it was working out in the fields or whether it was working in his home, whether it was repairing something or building something, whatever it was, God gave me success. And, Potiphar noticed these things. And as I said, I never tried to hide the fact that I trusted in God. Now, the gods of Egypt, they were not the God that I worshipped. As far as I'm concerned, and this is a fact, their gods were meaningless. These gods that they worshipped were all made by hands, the hands of men creating their own gods. I mean, how crazy is that? My God is the one who created us, the one who created the world. That's why I trusted in him. My father had told me so much about my God our God, the only true God, the things that he had planned for his people. And I believed this. I knew that God had great plans for his people. And I knew that God was with me. And I would pray to God. I wouldn't try to hide it. I would speak about my God. I wasn't ashamed of doing that. And Potiphar noticed these things. And he also noticed how everything I did was good. He'd never had a servant quite like me before. Now, he noticed me praying. He noticed me speaking of my God. But he noticed how successful I was. And so Potiphar promoted me in his household. Soon, Potiphar put me in charge of everything. Absolutely everything. So, I was the one who controlled all the other servants. I was the one who decided what we were going to plant in the fields. I was the one who made sure that the food was prepared properly. I did everything. I prepared the accounts to make sure all the finances were good. I made sure the home was in good working order. I did everything for Potiphar. He no longer had to worry about anything. In fact, the only thing that he needed to worry about was, what would he have to eat? There was so much choice now. And that's the only thing that he really bothered about. You know, he had his own work to do, obviously, working for Pharaoh. But when it came home, he had nothing to worry about, except, what will I choose on the menu tonight? There's so many options, Joseph. So I was well trusted by Potiphar. But not everything was going well. I had noticed Potiphar's wife, she sort of liked me for different reasons, shall we say. Now, I was young, and people had said that I was handsome. I was clearly very strong, and that comes from all the hard work that I was doing. I was very clever, and God was with me. I mean, the blessings that family knew, that household knew, were obvious. But she liked me because of my looks. And soon I discovered, because she actually told me, that she'd taken a fancy to me, and she wanted to betray her husband. She wanted to cheat on her husband. Any time that Potiphar was away from home, she tried to get me alone. She wanted to have an affair with me. And I knew that was wrong. I told her, how can I betray your husband? He's my master. I work hard for him. I have served him well. How could I turn round and betray him by doing this to him? And even worse than that, how can I sin against my God? My God forbids this thing. If a man is married to a woman, then that relationship is sacred in the eyes of God. And no one should separate them. And you are asking me to do this. I will not sin against my God. And so I avoided this woman. At every opportunity, I made sure that if ever I was in her presence, then there were plenty of other people in our presence as well, just to make sure that she didn't do anything that I knew was wrong. And so it went on, but it wasn't easy. I mean, she was the mistress. She was the one who was in charge when Potiphar was away. Well, I was actually doing all the work. But one day, I was taken by surprise. She set a trap. She had made sure that all the other servants were out of the house doing other things. I thought she was also out of the house. I went into a room to get some things, and there she was. And she shut the door behind me. Now, I knew exactly where this was going, and I knew that I had to get away. And as she moves towards me, she grabs a hold of my cloak. And I just fought her off. I worked my way out of my cloak, and I just left the cloak, and I managed to get out the other door. And I just ran, and I thought, wow, that was close. I need to be more careful in future. But she wasn't finished. Oh, no, she wasn't finished. She was so angry. Her pride was hurt. How dare someone not do what she wanted? How dare I not do what she wanted? Even though what she wanted was wrong. Even though what she wanted was for me to betray the trust that my master had. Even though what she wanted was a sin against my God. Well, she was so angry. You know, she didn't even care about all the good that had come to her household. All the benefits that had come because my God was with me in this home. She didn't care about these things. She was just so angry that she was determined to make sure that I was punished. She didn't want me to speak the truth. She was afraid of what her husband would do if he found out the truth. So this is what she did. She called in all the servants into her home. And there she is. She still had my cloak in her arms. And she told them lies. She said that I had tried to attack her. And then when Potiphar came home, she told him the same lies. She said, that servant of yours, that Hebrew of yours that you bought, he tried to attack me today. A blatant lie. And Potiphar believed her story. You know, he could have killed me, but he didn't. But what he did do is he threw me into the top security prison. The prison that the king's prisoners were placed. That's where I was placed. And I was left there. Who knows how long? I wasn't told, but I was there for years. But you know what? The Lord was with me. And we'll find out what happens to Joseph in the prison in the next part of the story. But let's try and go over today's story and think of some lessons that we can see in that story. First of all, I want to think about Joseph. I want to think about how he remained faithful to God, even when something bad happened to him. I mean, imagine being treated like that by your own brothers, your own family. Imagine being sold as a slave. You know, that might make some people think, you know, what's God doing? Why is God letting this happen to me? And you know, people so easily just, they don't understand what's going on, and they just immediately blame God for any wrong thing that happens. Even people who most of their life don't even think about God. But as soon as something bad goes wrong, all of a sudden it's God's fault. Why is God doing this to me? Why did God let that happen to me? And they've never even thought about God when things were going well. Well, Joseph wasn't like that. Joseph trusted in his God because Joseph really knew his God. You know, God wasn't just a name. It wasn't just something you talked about. God was real. Joseph had experienced the reality of God in his life. And as he moved into that household working for Potiphar, he experienced again that God was with him, that God helped him in everything he did. And so he didn't try and hide his faith in God. You know, those of us who do believe in God, those of us who know that he's real, those of us who have come to believe in his Son as our Saviour, you know, that's what God did for all of us, the whole world. There's a verse in the New Testament, John chapter 3, verse 16. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish, but have everlasting life. That verse tells us how much God loves us. He sent his own Son into this world to save us from our sins and from the punishment that those sins deserve. Jesus took the punishment. He died on that cross at Calvary for each and every one of us. And God says, if you believe with all your heart that my Son did this for you, then God will forgive us all the wrong things that we have done, all the sins that we have done. God will forgive us, and we will become the children of God. Now that involves turning away from those sins. No longer continuing with those sins, but now seeking to serve God. That's what Joseph was doing. He was serving his God. Bad things happen, and bad things happen to Christians today. But God never changes. God has plans, and God had a plan for Joseph, and Joseph continued to believe in his God. So there he is now, rather than being free and working for his father, now he's a slave, he's a servant working for this man in Egypt. But he gives his best because he believes that that's what he should do. As a believer in God, he gives his best, no matter who it's for. He serves others as if he was serving God himself. But he always does what is right and good, not what is evil. And so Joseph knew the blessing of God. But when Potiphar's wife comes along, Joseph knows he must avoid the sin that she is seeking after. He knows he must be faithful to his master and faithful to his God. So there's some great lessons there from Joseph himself. Let's think about Potiphar for a minute. There's Potiphar, this powerful man in Egypt, captain of Pharaoh's own palace guard. And he buys this slave from the market one day. And then he sees something different about this man. There's something different about the way he works. There's something different about the way he prays to his God, the way that he is so faithful to his God, even though he's now a slave in Potiphar's household. And he's quite a wise man, is Potiphar. He sees how his God is blessing him and how his God is using him, and he promotes him. He trusts him. He trusts him. You see, a person who truly believes in God is trustworthy. And that's what he saw in Joseph. So Potiphar's a bit of a wise man there. Think about Potiphar's wife for a moment now. You see, Potiphar's wife didn't seem to care about all the good things that Joseph had brought to the household. She was only interested in herself. She didn't even really love her husband. If she truly loved her husband, then she wouldn't have been after Joseph. So that's a problem when we become so obsessed with self, when we're not interested in how that will affect other people. She didn't seem to care about how that may affect her circumstances in the future. What if her husband found out? What would happen? She didn't care about those things. She was selfish, and she only wanted to please herself now. There's lots of people like that in our world today. They seek pleasure now, and they don't think about the future. They're not willing to put off things to have a better future. She was selfish and thought only of herself, no other. And she was also prepared to lie. She didn't care about the fact that Joseph had brought these great blessings to their household. She just wanted Joseph punished. And she lied. Knowing that her husband would trust her before he would trust even the best of his servants. She lied. Again, this is a selfish act. And so much of this is happening in our world all the time. People who don't care about others and they lie. And as a consequence of their lies, other people suffer. But fortunately, in Joseph's circumstances, even when Joseph ended up in the prison, in the top security prison in all of Egypt, the Lord was still with him. And the same can be true for you if you truly trust in God. No matter what circumstances you find yourself in, if you truly trust in God, then He will be with you. Thanks again for listening, guys. Hope you come back